Juicy couture tracksuits with the signature juicy in the bottom, fun Dutch caps, sparkly details and accessories. You may have guessed it already, we are traveling back in time and we are traveling to the early 2000s. This is usually the time when I go back into my so-called personal archives and look for some outfits that make me feel like dressing up for a fancy dress party, but we are not doing that today. We are actually talking about a fashion trend. And when you think about it, the tracksuits worn by Paris Hilton, the fun Dutch caps, Ed Hardy, also the Louis Vuitton Murakami collection, which was just being relaunched in January. What do most people think? This is Y2K, but actually we have to be more specific because this was another trend that happened in the early 2000s, which is called McBLING. Some of you will be familiar with the term, for some of you it may be new. And why is that so? Why is McBLING not as known as Y2K? It's actually something fairly normal in history. History means, and also fashion history means, that we are talking about something that lives. And it's very difficult to cut off certain trends and movements at a certain time and say it only happened from this date until this date. Very often trends blended into each other. Also, region is a big part because sometimes the timelines are different and also how the trend was lived, how fashion was worn was different. We can't say everything was the same all over the world. This is just unrealistic. So that one trend is lumped together with another one is actually nothing new. This has happened across history. Think about it. We say 60s fashion, but there are so many sub-trends within 60s fashion. We have the space trend, we have the graphic patterns. At the end of the 60s, we have the hippies. All of this is very often lumped together, so it's nothing new. But I realized when it comes to the discussion about Y2K or McBLING, it is a very, I would say, sometimes emotional discussion. I saw different reactions on it, and my explanation would be that it happened fairly recently. A lot of us grew up during that time, or they lived through those times, and we still remember them, while when we look back to the 60s or 70s, it is becoming a bit more abstract because it is already longer ago than the early 2000s. So what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to talk about Y2K versus McBLING. I also want to look into the details and characteristics of McBLING because it's simply lesser known than the Y2K trend. And before we start, what do researchers do? They define the terms, they define the timelines. And this is something that is very, very important with this Y2K trend, because I think that term Y2K can have many different meanings. So most people, when they hear Y2K today, they probably think about the current trend, the interpretation of the trend that happened in the past, which means either vintage items from the past or re-editions or also new interpretation of certain trends. And let me just give you an example for this. In the late 90s, early 2000s, there was also a big trend of wearing cargo pants, especially denim pants. And this is kind of, at least for me, I lived through the time in Austria. When I think of Y2K, what happened around the time, I also think of these pants. And how were they worn? They were worn very low. And usually also the girls, when they wore them, they wore boxer shorts that you could see, and then a crop top with it. So it was kind of like the male fashion that was taken up. Today, these pants experience a certain revival, but they are worn differently. They are worn higher up and also paired with the crop tops again, but I would say there is a difference in the look. And the context of the current Y2K trend also shows us something else. A lot of people go online, they look for vintage items, then they probably type in vintage 2000s, and then they like certain items, the tracksuits, the fun Dutch caps or whatever, and they think because of early 2000s, this is Y2K. They don't know about the terminology, they don't know about the McBLING trend or the Y2K trend. They just see those items from that particular time, and then they wear it again, or they show a different interpretation of it. And of course, this then contributes to the confusion around the terms, why they are very often mixed up, or why McBLING is used under this overall umbrella term of Y2K. So this is also something that we need to keep in mind. So this is the first meaning, this current Y2K trend, a new interpretation of a trend that happened in the past. And then we have the term Y2K for when the trend actually happened, around the year 2000. And let's remember, Y2K in its basic meaning, irrespective if it's fashion or not, means year 2000 and also related to the technical issues around the turn of the millennium. And then we need to look at the timeline. Some people say it happened from 1998 to roughly around 2002, 2003. Other people take a longer approach and say it was 1995 until 2008, some even say late 2000. So it always depends on the person writing an article, doing a video, the researcher, what they define. One thing I would like to point out here, we did not call it Y2K fashion. We did not call it McBLING. Because why? Simply because these terms came up after the trends happened. And this is nothing exclusive to fashion. This is history that very often we look back and then we see certain time periods and then we give them names. And then we have the timeline of the McBLING trend. And some people say it started around 2002-03 and it went until 2008 or the late 2000s. And again, I find it a bit difficult to always pin it down on certain years because, as I said, a lot of trends, they existed alongside each other. They also influenced each other. And as I said, this is normal in history. I gave you the example of the 1960s fashion. It's similar to 1970s fashion, 1980s fashion. This is not exclusive to the time. I would just be in general very careful to say we can cut a trend off at a certain time. As I said before, trends are something that we live, something how we interpret it, and also again it depends on the region. And there are different views on McBLING. Some people say it was a separate trend, some people say it was a logical consequence of Y2K, and some people say it was a sub-trend of Y2K. And now I already see the comments blow up. You can't say that McBLING and Y2K are the same. But I would just like to make a point here. Some people may see it as the same for the same reason why I gave you the example of the 1960s before. Think about it. The early 2000s are now, let's say, roughly 20 years away from us, and things become more relative. When it actually happens, 3 years, 4 years is a very long time. But when we look in the past, 3 to 4 years is actually not that much. So of course, people tend to apply a different perspective on it and see the bigger picture. And I have to say, I'm not offended if somebody lumps those trends together, because it becomes relative over time. It becomes very difficult to cut off one trend from the other. I will go into the details a bit later. I just personally always try to see it through the lens of the person who wrote the article, who did the video. What trend did they actually refer to? Is it the Y2K fashion when it actually happened, and in which country were they? Then I also think, okay, maybe they talk about Y2K fashion today, or they go into the specifics of McBLING. So personally, I don't take offense. Let me know how you see it. If you see it very strict that we have to separate, this is McBLING, this is Y2K, or if you also say over time, these two will kind of merge together. And I would like to take the late 1990s as an example to show you why I find it so difficult to cut off trends. Because even in the late 90s, where people say this is Y2K, there were still influences from other movements. We still had influences from grunge. We still had the influence also from hip-hop, for example. We had the simplicity from the 1990s. Still, there was also a bit of the glamour by Versace, for example. So it's, for me, I find it very difficult to say this is the trend, this is not. I see it, there are these trends, and then I look into it how they actually overlapped, and maybe sometimes they created something together. So this is one solution that I apply when I look at fashion trends, not only for late 90s or early 2000s, also for other periods. And I'm not saying this is the solution and this is the way to see it. There are many different ways of seeing it. And I'm curious if you have also applied this approach or if you see it differently. This is an open forum. Please share your opinions in the comments below. So, but we have the different trends here, and I would like to look into this Y2K in the narrow sense and also McBLING. So when I talk about Y2K in the narrow sense, I usually give the example of denim, because that was basically all around, no matter which group you belong to. And I say this because fashion at the time was also very much influenced by the music to listen to. So first of all, you had the skaters, at least in Austria that was the case, with the cargo pants, cargo denim pants. They were worn low-rise, as I said before, usually paired with boxer shorts. And the total opposite of the skaters were the so-called ravers, at least in the German-speaking countries. This was the term. I don't know if this is applicable to other countries and the US. And these people listened to electronic music. They wore the bootcut pants, very often also paired either with platform shoes or also with sneakers. So you also had the influence from other times, the platforms from the 70s, for example. And a lot of people did not identify with either. They were not skaters and they were not ravers. They were somewhere in between. I was one of them, but I have to say I always preferred the bootcut jeans over the cargo pants. This was just more my style. And as I just said, there were influences from other times. So it is difficult to separate the late 90s, early 2000s from other trends, because in the late 90s we still had a big influence from grunge. There was punk, and there was also kind of a sub-trend, I would say, because there was this preppy look, the Ralph Lauren polo shirts with the Tommy Hilfiger jeans, maybe a branded belt and also pearl earrings. So this was also going on at the same time. Why do I usually pick the denim example for this Y2K McBLING discussion? It's first of all because it was blue, and this denim blue was a big topic in the late 1990s. I can only agree to this in a certain way. Yes, there was a lot of blue. In addition to denim, blue in general was popular, but at least how we wore it in Austria, there was also some color that we added to it. So sometimes you wore your jeans and then I had this bright yellow top with cutouts that was also late 1990s. So I'm not sure if I can only pinpoint it to blue as the main dominant color. At least that's not, when I think about the times, this is not the only color that's coming up. Maybe I'm biased. There was another element that is very often brought up for the late 1990s, and this was silver, for the reason of the link to space, which I also agree with, because space was a big topic, I think, because we were all thinking about tech. Maybe not tech how we know it today, but this was the beginning of the internet. Then also the year 2001 related to the famous movie with the same name. So it was kind of an era where the future and futuristic things were really popular. This was also sometimes reflected in the hairstyles, but this was one element that we also looked into space, but I would not say this was the only characteristic of the late 1990s. I very often come across an analogy with movies or TV shows when we talk about McBLING and Y2K. A lot of people say if you think about the Y2K trend, the late 1990s, for example, would be Matrix. And if we think of McBLING, we could say it's The Simple Life, the reality TV show with Paris Hilton and Nicole Richie, or Mean Girls, for example. That's a good starting point, but in addition, I would kind of enrich the Matrix perspective by further movies, like for example, She's All That or 10 Things I Hate About You, because there you can see also the fashion of the late 1990s reflected, this denim trend, also the cropped tops, the simpler lines that were also a legacy from the whole 1990s. So I think maybe we can say the best analogy was Matrix meets 10 Things I Hate About You. Maybe we can say it like this. I do agree with the examples for McBLING. I think they illustrate it really well. And let's look into the Mean Girls example from 2003, because when we look at the plastics, the friends around Regina George, they actually exemplify that trend of McBLING, the ultra micro skirts, then paired with the juicy couture hoodies, also the t-shirts with the writing on. Like for example, one t-shirt that was really famous was Paris Hilton with Don't Be Jealous. And even in Mean Girls, Regina George wears t-shirts with some prints on them. Then also you had the Murakami edition with Louis Vuitton that I mentioned before. And all of these elements, I mentioned it in my introduction. People think this is Y2K, but this actually represents this McBLING trend. And picking up on the juicy couture tracksuits, they stand for one thing. This is this logomania, but also for tracksuits overall. And probably the pictures that come into mind about the time is Missy Elliott and her tracksuits, also her embellished outfits. We could say this is kind of the epitome of the McBLING trend, because a lot of these elements are taken up, and in general we can say McBLING also stood for this influence from the music industry that we already had in the late 1990s. Missy Elliott is a very famous example. Another example would be Eve. And I would like to also use the Juicy Couture tracksuit to show you why it is so easy to confuse Y2K and McBling. Juicy Couture, the brand as we know it today after rebranding, started in 1996, and this was the time where they also popularized the tracksuit. Throughout the years, this was, if we apply a very narrow sense, long before that 2002-2003 mark that a lot of people use for McBling. Yes, then in the long run, that same tracksuit was also linked to this McBling trend. But there are still people who argue, but it was there before, it was also part of Y2K. Just to give you an example why a lot of people confuse the two terms for the trends. And it's very interesting to look at the fashion trend McBling to also learn something about historic events overall, because what was one of the major impulses for the trend? This was 9/11. The consequence after 9/11 was this sense of pride in the US that was also kind of picked up or replicated in other countries. I mentioned this in my video about what we wore around the year 2000. It was actually kind of weird. Even in Europe, people were wearing clothes with the American flag. So I think this is something that also moved into other countries. And then after this event, it is sometimes said that people tried to escape the reality by consumerism. And as I said before, the term McBling was developed long after the trend happened, because it was developed in 2016 by Evan Collins, who is a researcher. And McBling is made up of two components. Mac refers to McDonald's, which is one of the symbols for American consumerism, capitalism, globalization. McDonald's was a really big thing at the time, for us at least, also in Europe, because it was this piece of America that you could buy. And bling, I don't think I need to explain this. This was because of this overall style. It was a lot of shiny details, diamonds, rhinestones, chunky jewelry, logos. This was basically the bling of the McBling trend. And when I think of McBling, I immediately associate it with one particular show on MTV, and this was Pimp My Ride with Exhibit. I watched this religiously every afternoon, or I also think it was on Saturdays. And there was one episode, I don't know if you've seen it, where they also put a rhinestone on the gear stick. And for me, this is just the epitome of this McBling trend. It's not only for fashion, but also for cars or other things that we use in the daily life. And I also do think that McBling was kind of a natural consequence of Y2K in the narrow sense, because as I said before, what does Y2K mean? It's more than just the year 2000. It relates to the problem that we had around the year 2000. And speaking about this today, it feels a bit funny, even a bit ridiculous, but there was a huge technical problem with the year 2000, because in the 90s, we just used the last two digits of the years, 88, 95, 96, 99. And then what would happen with the year 2000? It would be a double zero. So a lot of people were really, really worried. The internet, the connectivity, technology was already there. Would this mean a reset of all the technology? Would everything break down? As I said, it sounds a bit funny today, but I remember discussions if nuclear reactors would shut down, all of this. People were really worried. In the end, we overcame that problem despite all the conspiracy theories. I remember Nostradamus was a big thing because he already hundreds of years ago forecasted that the world would go down at the year 2000. He's also said to have forecasted the problem with the Titanic. But as you see, we are still here. The world didn't go down at the year 2000. But what I find so interesting about the time is, on the one hand, there was this fear of technology, and to a certain degree, it's similar to what we have today, just in a different context. When we speak about AI, people are also a bit scared about new technology, but at the same time, it was exciting. It was something new. Something new was about to come. And I remember I was so excited every evening when I could use the internet. I still remember the sound from the modem, but it was something so new. You could chat with people at the other side of the world without paying like hundreds of dollars for talking to them. You had access to information. The first websites came about. So all of this was very exciting. I personally have to say I was not scared of this. In general, I'm not really scared of technology, but I do understand why there was this ambivalence between technology is good, but what does this mean for the future? So this was just the overall feeling at the time. And then McBling actually kind of comes out of this, because We realized this fear of the problem with technology was not there. We see the opportunities. So the phones become more sophisticated. We have the flip phones. It was before the smartphones, but there was the BlackBerry. In 2007, the first iPhone came out. There were also the first social media platforms. MySpace was a big thing. In the German-speaking countries, we had our platforms. So all of this was very new. So I would say McBLING stands for this newness, this age of digitalization that then developed so fast. Soon from the flip phones, we would be able to also take pictures that became increasingly better. And now we are here filming entire YouTube videos on phones and small cameras. So at the time, this was the start of this whole development, and McBLING kind of represents this development. And with this digital development, barriers were broken down, and McBLING in fashion also overcame the barriers, because suddenly you saw outfits that a few years before were just outrageous. Nobody would wear that. It was very loud, it was logos, it was bright colors. We could even say anything was possible, no matter if it corresponded to the good taste of the time, because very often people also say McBLING was a terrible time. It stands for bad taste, it looks trashy or tacky, that's also a view on it, but it definitely also represented this overcoming of barriers. So there was this alternative reality with the onset of social media and all these digital developments. Maybe people took that up and created an alternative reality with fashion, where they could do whatever they wanted to do. If they wanted to be loud, if they wanted to show logos, if they wanted to sparkle, they could just do it, no matter what were the standards at the time. And I already mentioned the brands that most often are associated with this McBLING trend. Further brands would also be the Italian label Blumarin. This was very big. Also Abercrombie & Fitch, but I do have to say I think there is a time lag, because in my opinion Abercrombie & Fitch fits into this McBLING aesthetics in the US, but because for the longest time you could not get it in Europe, it took longer until it came to Europe, and I think that's why that trend lasted a bit longer. So I have a bit of difficulties cutting that Abercrombie & Fitch trend off at a certain time, because it also depends on the region. So logos was a big thing for the McBLINGers. I already mentioned the Louis Vuitton monogram canvas, especially the interpretations during the Murakami editions, but also the Gucci canvas was really big. And the easiest way to have bling was either with big jewelry or also rhinestone accessories. Everybody had a rhinestone belt. I had quite a few of them. Unfortunately, I can't find them anymore. Some were quite thin, just one row of rhinestones. Some were really broad. So there were different interpretations. And this was actually the easiest way to also live this McBLING trend without knowing it's called McBLING. It was jeans with bling accessories. Usually we just wore the jeans, then a crop top, and then this rhinestone belt, and then also a lot of these rhinestone accessories, glitter accessories. And as you can already see, denim is still a topic. So this was a topic long before the late 90s, but it's still there. But it changed a bit, because it would not be McBLING if it was not elevated, because it was designer jeans. So to live according to the McBLING trend, also the jeans had to be branded. 7 for All Mankind was a big thing, True Religion was a big thing. And then also other brands, even luxury brands, moved into the denim trend. I then remember the jeans by Louis Vuitton, for example. So this was definitely something that was also going on during McBLING. And McBLING was very much celebrity driven, for the reason that it was the very first time that we had the feeling that we could kind of connect with them, or that they became more accessible. You have to remember, this was before social media, so there was no Instagram where we could follow them. We could see celebrities in magazines, but then also on MTV. And then there were shows like MTV Cribs, where you could see their houses. Some people like Hulk Hogan, for example, had the show Hogan Knows Best, and then more and more reality TV shows came up later on, of course. What did this mean for us also outside of the US? It was the first time, this feeling that these people were accessible to us, even though they were so far away. it was also learning about the American lifestyle, because yes, there were movies and we watched Hollywood movies all the time, but watching a reality show gave you a very different idea about the American lifestyle. And for this reason, because it's celebrity driven and because of all the developments that I said before, McBLING can definitely be called maximalist. To a certain degree, it can also be seen as fake, I would say, because you probably remember the fake tans, either spray tans, then there was this weird mousse that you could put on. I never really was into this. Some people just tanned a lot to get this signature overly tanned look. Extensions, blonde hair. It was a bit fake. Some people say it was trashy. Now I said this, but this is also the view of McBLING. And another very interesting detail is also the beauty ideal, because when you look at the late 1990s, the female beauty ideal was very androgynous. Think about Kate Moss. And then when we look at McBLING, we could say diplomatically it's more feminine. You could even say it's way more sexualized. There was a lot of skin, more skin than in the 1990s. Skirts were really short. It was okay to also show cleavage at the same time. Then there was this really, really bad trend. I'm guilty of it too. We will never do it again, of wearing G-strings and then having them peek out from your pants, usually colorful G-strings. So this was a very different aspect than what happened before during the Y2K trend in the narrow sense. And this female beauty ideal is then also reflected in the lingerie tops. Some even wore these lingerie dresses, nightgowns on the red carpet. Then of course the micro skirts, the low-rise jeans I mentioned before, but then also through really weird trends like wearing a t-shirt with the Playboy bunny. But this also gives a certain signal. And then of course also Victoria's Secret was so popular. The shows were everywhere, and of course this was a beauty ideal that was fueled during this time, which was inaccessible for 99.9% of women, but this was there, and this was also part of one dimension of this McBLING trend. So now we have the basics of this McBLING trend, and I also hope that it's now a bit clearer how this trend came up overall, how Y2K influenced it or how it morphed into this McBLING trend. And I hope it's also now a bit more understandable why some people use the terms not interchangeably, but why they apply the Y2K term as an umbrella also for McBLING. I personally am not too bothered about this. Yes, of course, I know there is a difference, but I also understand why it is used interchangeably. So for me, this is not a big issue, but let me know what you think about this. Do you apply a broader approach, or are you really bothered if people don't make the distinction between McBLING and Y2K? Please let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, if you learned something new today, please let me know. Give me feedback by subscribing to this channel if you haven't done so already. A good idea is always to like my videos. It really helps us creators to get feedback from you by the subscription and also the likes. You can also read more fashion-related articles on my website, thepinklookbook.com, and also don't forget to check out my fashion label, Pelagona. And if you enjoyed this video, I also have another video for you where I describe what we wore around the year 2000. Thank you very much for watching this video, and see you in the next one.